Hello everybody and welcome to this evening's talk. We are delighted to invite Dr. Lucie Fremlova, who's come to talk to us today about her new book, Queer Roma. I've known Lucie for a really long time, and so I'm delighted that she's agreed to come and talk as part of the series. This is where Canterbury Christchurch University decided this year to have LGBT plus History Month and beyond. So I'm really pleased that we're the first and beyond event, which has gone into March, but there will be more throughout the year as well. This is because we think the conversations are important enough to not just pigeonhole into 1 month of the year, 1 month of the calendar, but to keep us talking about them all year long. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Lucie Fremlova today. Lucie is an independent researcher whose work bridges academia, activism, and policy throughout a long career that she's been working on these issues. She examines in particular questions around anti-Gypsyism and support for Roma communities across Europe, but also questions around queer theory and experiences of LGBT communities. And Lucie's new book, I found fascinating to read how these intersections and how there are some certain commonalities between the experiences of discrimination of LGBT plus communities and Roma communities, and that's something that she'll talk about today. Lucie's book was published last year by Routledge, and she has also published other articles, and in particular worth noting that her article LGBTIQ Roma and Queer Intersectionalities, the lived experiences of LGBTIQ Roma, was published in the European Journal of Politics and Gender in 2019, and it won their prize for Best Article in 2021. It also won a prize for the Council for European Studies Gender and Sexuality Research Network. So Lucie's work is widely recognised, and she's in great demand for these talks, so we're thrilled that she has time to join us today. Importantly too, Lucie's work has informed and as co-produced research with the participants in her research. That work has informed policy developments, transnational support and policy initiatives across Europe, the Open Society, the European Union and the Council of Europe. And I'm sure she's going to talk about some of that today as well. And I think it's important too that this work isn't just about Roma experiences, but that actually it informs policies and projects to support all young people and also LGBT plus communities in Europe too. So as I say, I'm not the presenter here today. I'm really thrilled Lucie is here to speak, and she's going to talk for about 25 minutes, and then we will open up for discussion. Using this platform, I'm afraid everybody can only use the chat function, but please do send your questions in and I'll chair them. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us, especially my first year students. So hello to you all. Hope you're listening carefully. And over to Lucie.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this amazing introduction that I really, really appreciate. And also thanks for the opportunity to present as part of today's seminar and the larger initiative that is amazing, and it's great to know that the university is doing so much to support LGBTIQ students, staff, and other people associated with the university and outside the university. So my talk today will be mainly about the book, but really I also want to approach certain concepts, certain ideas, and I just thought that it might be a good starting point to start with some conceptual definitions around the two main words used in the title of the book and also in my research. As Laura said, I have been working with Roma, or as part of the larger Romani rights movement for over 20 years. So I think it's really important to really kind of talk about some of the misconceptions that still exist around Roma. Roma is an umbrella term, and it's an umbrella term for a very diverse, heterogeneous, transnational ethnic minority, in fact, the largest ethnic minority in Europe. In the EU alone, Roma are estimated to number between 10 and 12 million. And, it's really important to also understand, some of the theories or the kind of common consensus around, where Roma originated from, and that place is believed, and there is linguistic and other evidence that suggests that Roma originated in northern India and migrated westwards from between the 3rd to the 9th and 10th centuries. Some of the earliest mentions of Roma in Europe date back to the 15th century. And, this is not a class on history, so I'm not going to go into details. But it's really, really important to know that, this was a massive migration wave. And as a result, Roma have spread throughout, not just Europe, but also different continents. And, therefore, there is this internal diversity and heterogeneity, which is often forgotten, and some of that heterogeneity is also referred to it's reflected in some of the different subgroups and the names that come under the umbrella term Roma. So I listed some of them. There are many more. It's important to know and to emphasize that Roma have maintained aspects of a shared culture, including language. So it's not uncommon for Roma who actually speak Romanes to understand each other. So a Roma from Mexico will understand, the kind of Romani spoken, for instance, by Slovakian Roma, even though there are some differences. A lot of the Roman dialects draw from the local, official language, but it's fairly easy, and I've seen it in practice when, at international events or conferences, people from across the world use Romanes, or also what is referred to as the Romani chip, the Roman language. So it clearly shows a common identity. But this identity is not homogeneous. I think that's what I'm trying to emphasize. The kind of homogenizing aspect is very important when it comes to stereotypes. So homogenization and the kind of stereotypical representations or misrepresentations are very, very common. And they're circulated almost on a daily basis in public spaces. In this connection, I would like to go back to over a month ago when the very, I will say, infamous stand-up comedian Jimmy Carr made a joke about, the numbers of Roma dying in the Holocaust, which has been largely condemned, although he hasn't apologized until now. And I'm using this example to show how acceptable, this type of racism, which is sometimes referred to as anti-Gypsyism, and anti-Roma racism, or Romaphobia, how acceptable it still is. But underlying that are common historic experiences of oppression, marginalization, persecutions, and at times annihilation. So it's a, when you look at the history of Roma and Roma culture, on the one hand you get this wealth of beautiful culture that spreads across every single continent. literally across every single continent. But it is accompanied by these awful experiences of, racism and persecution, including the Holocaust, the Roma Holocaust during the Second World War. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but one important thing I will say in connection with the current war in Ukraine waged by Russia, and the massive exodus of Ukrainian refugees into neighboring Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania, is also what you may have noticed, although it hasn't been covered much in British or international media. And that's the kind of discrimination that is currently happening at the borders with these countries, often from members of the voluntary sector. It's people from different reception centers, also bus drivers, firefighters. It's so tragic to see that even in such a tragic situation of war, where people are leaving, fleeing the country, trying to save their lives, there is still this like line being drawn between non-Roma and Roma. So, I just want to emphasize how deep-rooted, historically deep-rooted anti-Gypsyism is, and in what kind of situation it can occur. Importantly, in relation to, your event, the initiative, the monthly initiative that is currently going on, the LGBTIQ History Month. I also want to define the word queer, which is used also as an umbrella term, although some people still object to it. Some LGBT people will not identify or self-identify as queer. That's fine. That's their choice. But as we know, the term queer has been reclaimed for these different groups. Again, you see some parallels between these two terms, like an umbrella term Roma, an umbrella term queer, covering very diverse groups which share and have something in common. But more importantly, when it comes to, or as importantly, when it comes to theorizing and specifically queer theoretical concepts and queer theory, or the kind of, I would say, more evolved version of queer theory, which is the queer of color critique. Queer signifies an identity without an essence, a positionality vis-a-vis the normative. So in this take on queer, the concept is used as something and not necessarily an identity. It is used as a concept which becomes anti-essentialist, and I will get to it as I explain. And its main function is non or counter-normativity. So through the lens of queer, we can challenge and question, different types of norms, social norms, whether, it is heteronormativity, how many people still feel that it is normal to be heterosexual and it is not normal to be LGBT, or, the same would apply to white normativity, and how a lot of white people still consider whiteness as the dominant identity, and from there we have a dominant social norm that will determine certain behaviors, including racism, targeting people who are considered not white. So queerness and queer theoretical concepts have this potential, this kind of critical, non-normative and non-essentialist potential when it comes to theorizing identities, whether be they collective, individual, social, etc. And importantly, queer and queerness, queer of color critique or queer theory have been the main thrust of scholarship on sexuality and gender since the late 1980s and early 1990s. I want to emphasize that because that's something that gender conservative or critical transphobic feminists often have not even studied, and they're not familiar most often with this literature. They still choose to critique it, even though they haven't read it. So going back or going forward, and sort of talking about the book Queer Roma, which is the main topic of today's seminar, I wanted to show you, if you haven't seen it yet, it is available as an open access book online. So when I have more time, I will paste the link in the chat function, and I would encourage you, it would be great if you could look at it and download it free of charge. I've decided to include the contents section so that you have an idea of what the book covers. And you will see that in chapters 1 and 2, I tackle mainly theoretical and conceptual issues. So that's the kind of conceptual and theoretical framework, which also discusses the methodology. Let me clarify that the book is based on my doctoral thesis, and obviously, it has been updated. It is different from my doctoral thesis, but a lot of the theoretical and methodological stuff contained in chapter 1 is there to help people understand where this ethnography-informed qualitative research study is located in terms of, a discipline and otherwise. Needless to say, this is a transdisciplinary work, but mainly informed by Romani studies or critical Romani studies, I should say, and queer theory, plus intersectionality, and I'm going to get to that as we speak. So let me move on and discuss some of the themes that are covered in the book. So importantly, the book talks about queer Roma's experiences of anti-Gypsyism intersecting with homo, transphobia, and other types of oppression, including sexism. The way or the reason why I formulate this way is that many of the participants, many of the respondents that I have spoken with, for them, anti-Gypsyism was the most prominent form of oppression that has shaped their lives from a very young age. And it has been such a powerful force, negative force, as an oppression, that it often eclipsed their experiences of other oppressions such as homophobia or transphobia. So anti-Gypsyism plays a very important role in the lived experiences of queer Roma, even in community organizing, and some of the testimonials talk about the kind of racism within the mainstream LGBTIQ movement, and why it was very important for those who identify as LGBTIQ Roma to start coming up with their own way of organizing, because they felt that a lot of the issues were unanswered or neglected, or there was no interest in, those experiences, those lived experiences, and there was no understanding from non-Roma, which is quite strikingly, similar to some of the experiences of people, around UK Black Pride, for instance, and the reasons why UK Black Pride functions on its own, almost like separated from mainstream Pride, which is, quite sad. But then, it would be wrong for us to assume that, and this is something that the book shows as well, that it's not automatic for those people who are LGBTIQ to understand the lived experiences of our other minorities, and in this case, Roma. So, experiencing homophobia or transphobia doesn't make you automatically able to understand experiences of racism and vice versa. Interestingly, queer Roma are located at an intersection of these experiences. So they are very powerful bridges in terms of mediating those commonalities between the different groups. So in my mind, they have an extremely important role to play and have been playing an extremely important role in community organizing. The book also looks at experiences of or the importance of family, kinship, and community to the lived experiences of queer Roma, and the kind of ways in which those fundamental units, social units, impact on the enactment of non-normative sexual and gender identities. Importantly, it also discusses the fact that there is this almost like a social norm among LGBTIQ people, feeling that they must come out, that coming out is some sort of like compulsory process in order to be authentic and genuine. And not coming out makes you not genuine, or sometimes people would accuse you of being a liar or that you pretend something. Well, that's a privileged position that not everyone has, and some of the stories of queer Roma show that sometimes when people experience anti-Gypsyism so much, it's such a prominent oppressive force. Family, kinship, and community becomes such an important protective, network, safety network that you need and that you cannot really cut yourself from. And that's why you may not choose to come out, because you don't want to sever those important bonds. So navigating those intersections is very nuanced. There is no one way of being queer. There's no one way of being LGBTIQ. And I just want to emphasize that, these are not my experiences. These are experiences that, queer Roma have shared with me. I'm extremely thankful that this happened, because otherwise people like yourselves or other people would not be able to listen or read the stories of queer Roma. And again, I want to express my thanks to everyone who contributed to the research and also to the book. The book is quite unique because when we look at the public domain, the kind of stories, because there are some stories about queer Roma in the public domain, but usually, in mainstream media, you get a very stereotypical version of those stories, and usually those stories somehow suggest that Roma are homophobic, stereotypically homophobic. They do not accept the LGBTIQ members. And whilst there can be, such experiences and there definitely have been experiences of queer Roma who have been temporarily misunderstood or rejected or not accepted. Importantly, this book brings the unfamiliar, groundbreaking stories of acceptance by Romani families and communities. So, when I talk about the main takeaways of this book, I will mention this. So I'm gonna carry on a bit more. I realize that I may be running out of time, so let me skip certain bits. I will say that, for the most part, when we look at theorizing done mainly by Romanist studies and some critical Romanist studies, we see this, very narrow heteronormative reading of Roman ethnicity. What I mean by that is that ethnic identity, the ethnic identity of Roma, is believed also to be compulsorily heteronormative or heterosexual. The lived stories of queer Roma show us that that's not the case. And I like to, I'm not saying that this is right and this is wrong. I see it as a dilemma, and I'm not the only one. There are other authors who have spoken about, the queer dilemma, such as Gempson back in 1995. He also talks about the danger of mobilizing. So the benefit of mobilizing around fixed identity categories such as, LGBT or Roma, is obviously when there is lack of equality and unequal rights. That's exactly the identity around which those movements will organize. However, this kind of fixing of identity categories also becomes a means of oppression. And I think we are seeing some of that, especially when we look at the kind of transphobic vitriol spun by gender conservative, critical, and transphobic radicals who have nothing in common with feminism. Others have spoken about, identity dilemmas such as McGarry and Jesper. So I think it's really helpful to see identities and the kind of nuances around identities and social movements as dilemmas rather than something which is black and white or right or wrong. Something similar has happened in Roma rights organizing. Since early 2000, we have seen this emergence of a very powerful movement of Romani feminism, which within a couple of years became Romani intersectional feminism. And at that time, so this would have been, like I said, early 2000s, 2006, and so on and so forth. Intersectional Romani feminists such as Koche or Prea started talking about these intersections of, ethnic identity, gender or sex, class, and the fact that they felt not very welcome, in the predominantly male Romani rights movement at that time. So we see some similarities, 10 years later, when the Romani rights movement started emerging, we were able to see some similarities whereby, people who were opposed to the extension of Romani ethnicity to also other Roma, such as LGBT Roma, were saying, you're becoming white, you're becoming non-Roma, you're becoming Gajikane, which means, somebody who is not Roma or is non-Romaized, if you like. Again, we see these identity dilemmas being omnipresent. But what we also see is that the emergence of the decolonial queer intersectional Romani feminism has been incorporated into not just the mainstream Roma rights movement, but also, to probably a lesser extent to, LGBTIQ organizing. And it's really important to see, this sort of incorporation of decolonial, critical race, intersectional and queer feminism into these structures. I have included some visuals so that you can also see that, there is a vibrant community behind not just the book and my talk. Ideally on this talk, it should have been all these people talking about their experiences, but we wouldn't be able to squeeze it into 20 or 25 minutes. My research went hand in hand with the first two international Roma LGBT conferences in 2015 and 2016. So, these photos are from those conferences, and also from the Prague Pride March, at which we all participated as part of the conference. I'm over time, definitely, but let me just say that, going back to the beneficial nature of queer theoretical concepts, and why I felt they're very, very useful, is that they have facilitated debates about the fluid, socially constructed nature of identities and identification since the 1990s. So this type of scholarship really shows us, that, and it's not, queer theoretical concepts have not been used only to theorize sexual and gender identity, but also race and ethnicity, all of them being collective social identities. So, those concepts are very helpful when we look at the kind of fluid nature of those identities. They have also been critiqued, naturally, because there is no ideal recipe for theorizing identity. All theories, all concepts have their pros and cons. So, certain scholars have felt that, as critique of destabilization of categories. So, this sort of notion that they're sort of an identity without an essence vis-a-vis social norms. This is helpful, but sometimes critics of queer theory have felt that queer theorizing avoids the analysis of asymmetrical power relations or identity politics. So in that sense, intersectionality, which has been used in critical Romani studies since the early 2000s. Intersectionality in this sense is the analytical lens through which we can analyze asymmetrical power relations, specifically in relation to Romani women. And you will probably know that intersectionality is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, the American legal scholar, in her two key publications that came out in 1989 and 1991. So even though she spoke about the positionality and the position of Black Afro-American women in the US, and we have to bear in mind that the US creates unique sets of challenges in terms of the kind of socio-economic position of people that cannot be compared to, let's say, the position of a Romani woman somewhere in the Ukraine, or even the UK or the Czech Republic. There are certain key milestones which are really important when it comes to intersectionality and the analysis of power relations that are inequitable. Importantly, some queer theorists, believe it or not, such as, just like I said that there has been a critique of queer theory, there has also been a critique of intersectionality, because this is something that scholars like to do. They like to critique one another, the different concepts and frameworks they use. So, obviously this is not a joke, but I want to say that, an important critique of intersectionality comes from a queer theoretical scholar, Jasbir Puar, who in 2005 saw intersectionality as a structural container that simply wishes the messiness of identity into a formulaic grid. That was later in 2007, but the idea around reinscribing norms such as whiteness is also Pua's idea, dating back to 2005. So how do we approach all of this? I have chosen some visuals, again, some visuals to illustrate, you know, the idea that I have been trying to explain and describe in my presentation, the notion that identities are fluid, that they evolve depending on the surrounding systems of cultural representation. Those of you who are into social science will know a lot of the theory comes from you know, people like Stuart Hall, British cultural studies. So you know, for instance, how Black identity has evolved in the UK in the 1960s and 1970s. You know, it has created some amazing sort of intersectional, some amazing intersectionalities of identities as well, and we have a possibility to apply, you know, a similar lens to Romani identities and see how they evolve, that it's not a single sort of fixed entity, but it really becomes almost like a rhizomic substance that is shaped by, you know, different types of encounters, you know. So when we look at this set of photos, the black and white photo is a very famous photo taken sometimes at the end of the 1960s by a famous Czech photographer, Koudelka, who took this photo in Romania. The reason I have chosen this photo and then, you know, the kind of juxtaposition with the other photo from 2015 taken at the Gay Pride in Prague is to show you that even today, when you ask people, you know, if you ask a random person, do you know who a Roma person is? Very often they will give you a description which fits the black and white photo rather than the photo of LGBTIQ Roma in the other picture. So we see this kind of tension between myth, something that has become a stereotype, a myth, versus reality. These photos, when I say we, it's a group of queer Romani activists and artists, visual activists and artists. Back in 2019, when I was doing my postdoc at the University of Portsmouth, I was also wondering how to enhance the impact of my doctoral research. And we felt that, you know, creating visual self-representations would be something, you know, that there's this saying that a picture speaks 1,000 words. And I feel that sometimes, you know, a picture will reveal so much more than, you know, a 300-page book. And in this day and age, many people also operate in shortcuts. So, you know, visuals and self-representations, visual self-representations have that potential and power to speak to people, you know, very quickly and to reveal certain notions that a book may reveal in a very, very complex manner. Again, some more visuals to show you the diversity of Roma who are queer. You know, these are sort of, you know, everyday photos of everyday life, you know, everyday couples. And obviously, if you didn't know that they're Roma and queer, or, you know, actually in one of the photos, one of them is trans, you wouldn't necessarily know that, you know, this is the case. So that's the kind of nuanced reading that these photos work with as well. So I'm sort of slowly approaching the end of my presentation. I will kind of jump back again to theory. I've spoken about queer theoretical concepts and intersectionality. In the book and in my research, in my writing, I use the concept of queer intersectionalities. So I'm trying to read the two concepts in conjunction because I believe that the ability to see identities as fluid, as unstable, as non-essentialist, which is provided by queer theoretical concepts on the one hand, and then the ability to analyze the workings of asymmetrical power relations, which is provided by intersectionality, gives us a plausible answer to the question of whether it is possible to theorize Romani identities as non-essentialist, unstable, and fluid. Romani identities are lived, experienced within, constructed through, and impacted by the discursive practices of these social worlds, interlocking power relations and structural inequalities. So being able to see those experiences through the lens of queer intersectionalities actually allows us to do both. Investigating categories of identification such as sexuality and gender identity helps us understand the complexity of the everyday lives of individuals who self-identify or identify as LGBTIQ Roma without reifying ethnicity as an essentialized fixed group concept. And this is something which is very sort of you will find it almost characterizes most Romani studies scholarship, where ethnicity is seen as fixed, and unfortunately even those scholars who approach it from a social constructionist perspective end up essentializing or introducing aspects of essentializing Romani identity. And being able to attend to these underlying power relations, social binaries, and cultural scripts of the majority society, whether it's the non-Roma majority or the heterosexual or the cisgender majority, it helps us to look beyond ethnicity, and we are able to look at structural issues common to both Roma and non-Roma, such as homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny. And whilst acknowledging and being able to investigate the specific effects that the intersection with anti-Gypsyism produce for queer Roma. So what I'm gonna end on is this notion that the lived experiences and visual self-representations of LGBTIQ Roma pose a fundamental challenge to stereotypical one-dimensional negative homogenizing misrepresentations of Roma as homophobic and antithetical to European and Western modernity. And that's where I'm gonna finish. If you would like to view some more photos that I have shown you, you can go to the link qrstock.qrtv.eu, where you can view the project and also the photos. And these are also some of the other articles. I'm very active on Twitter as well, currently mainly tweeting stuff about Ukrainian Roma and how to help them. So if you're interested, follow me, and yep, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Lucie. If anybody has any questions, if you'd like to put them in the chat, that would be fantastic. I'm just double checking that I'm on now, Katja. Can people hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Super.
Okay, I don't know how. I'm new to this too. I don't know how it works. Yeah. So while I'm waiting for anybody else to put in some questions, I have some, if I may abuse my role as chair. I think reading the book, it really struck me how there is this real tension in Roma activism, in Roma studies, around this question of strategic essentialism. So Roma is an umbrella term that a lot of people don't like, but they recognize that, to get the European Commission or the Council of Europe or the UN to act, you need to say 10 to 12 million people. And to do that, you use this umbrella term. And then equally, as you say, with this notion like around pride and queer, and then within the umbrella, there can be lots of differences. And so I suppose And then your book makes it so clear how those individual life stories are all really unique and really different. And every person who you feature in the book, you know, who produces this with you, talks about how they try to pass sometimes, how they, in one scenario, one part of their identity is more important than in another. And I suppose, and this is the tension around political activism, is that sometimes you do just have to mobilize on one axis. How do you think, listening to those stories and talking to people, is this kind of strategic approach the right one, especially when you think about the work of the Council of Europe or the European Union? How, what is the most effective way to go about these things, or how do we keep the nuance but yet achieve the aims of the movement?
Thank you, Laura. So I actually, addressed this issue in the last chapter of the book. I talk about some of the possible implications of, these sort of nuanced readings of Romani identities as, intersectional and fluid. And obviously what you have said is, a very good characterization of where things have been for a long time. I feel that, and that's one of the things that I say, and I'm not the only one to say this, there are also some sort of leading Romani figures who have been saying this for some time as well, that when we look at the sort of backlash against, minority discourses, equality discourses, the people, especially, populists and the far right, have been able to do so. And they have been able to attack, I mean, they would attack, any attempt to achieve equality, because fundamentally, they don't want equality for everyone. Yeah. But my feeling is that, community organizations have not really addressed the fact that things change, that some of the conceptual frameworks that were used and were efficient in early 2000, for instance, won't necessarily work in 2020 because things change, and I think this is something that, even Romani intersectional feminists or queer Roma have been talking about, that the sort of approach used in the Roma rights movement in the 2000s is very different to what is necessary now, because some of the issues are different as well, socioeconomic things have changed, so movements and organizations really need to be able to respond to those, and one of my suggestions in the book is for organizations, and not just organizations, but also big, intergovernmental organizations such as the Council of Europe, or even political institutions such as the European Commission, to revisit some of the policies and actually legislation around intersectionality. One thing which people may or may not know is that back in 2008, there was a proposal for what is referred to as the horizontal directive, and the horizontal directive was meant to be, the key piece of legislation at the level of the European Commission and the European Union, bringing together, introducing intersectionality and intersectional approach, and bringing together, some of the other directives such as the Race Equality Directive, Employment Directive, and so on and so forth. For some reason, nothing has changed since 2008. So, we don't have the directive. Even if we did, it wouldn't matter to the UK at this point in time, thanks to Brexit. But, we also see that, sometimes this kind of strategic essentialist dimension, even though it may be embedded within community organizing. There may be some individual calls for a slightly different approach, but then if it's not really responded to by, these sort of big decision makers, whether they're, at the national, international level, there is not much we can do. But yeah, I mean, at the grassroots level, I think an intersectional approach is really, really necessary, and also more discussion about, the kind of fluid nature of identities, because I feel that even when we look at the kind of transphobic vitriol, which is currently ongoing, has been ongoing in the UK for the past several years, this is also because there is a lack of discussion among, community organizations that work with LGBTIQ people on the fluid nature of even, sexuality and gender identity. So I think scholars like myself try to chip in. We try to offer, different views. We try to explain the difference between essentialism, whether it's biological essentialism, cultural essentialism, which basically every transphobic person, even people who call themselves feminists currently use. What they consider the primacy of biological sex as a given over, our sort of evolving sense of who we are, which would be the kind of social constructionist approach. So yeah, it's very complex, but those discussions do have to be had.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think that's everything is always more complicated than it first appears, isn't it? And that's
definitely
the joy of academia, but also the difficulty of real life, I suppose. I've had another question here on this theme of intersectionality from one of my colleagues, David Bates. Is there a danger of appropriation, that is, appropriating the term intersectionality, a Black feminist concept, to this queer Roma context? I know some writers have refused, for example, to incorporate class analysis into an intersectional context. And are there any tensions between queer theory and intersectional theory?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So there are massive tensions, and unfortunately, I don't have the time to go into like a fully detailed discussion, because we would only be talking about theory. But my book and the first chapter actually discuss those tensions. Yeah. I mean, is it appropriation though? I'm not sure it is appropriation. The ability to see some parallels. So when we look at the racialized and gendered position of, Black Afro-American women in the US, and then we look at the racialized or ethnicized and gendered position of Romani women in Europe, or beyond Europe as well. I believe there is a good reason to use some of the analytical tools that intersectionality equips us with. But I do talk about the kind of pros and cons of both queer theoretical concepts and intersectionality in my book. And I believe that, it is possible to read them in conjunction. That's why I come up with the term queer intersectionalities. Other people have used similar readings of queer theory and intersectionality before. So, for instance, Yekani talks about, and Yekani and her team talk about queer interdependencies. And essentially they're trying to enunciate a similar idea. But the bottom line is both concepts have relevance for the lived experiences of queer Roma. Plus, some queer Roma are from the US, and they have been interviewed for the purposes of this book. So I honestly do not think it's appropriation in this sense.
Okay, thank you. Another question has come in asking, what is the emphasis placed on space and spaces in your research?
Sorry, can you repeat it again?
Yes. What is the emphasis placed on space or spaces in your research?
For some reason, your microphone is not very clear at this point in time. So I'm also trying to read it in the chat, but for some reason, I cannot.
Okay, I'll try one more time. What is the emphasis placed on space?
Space, okay. So thank you. So space plays a very important role. Space, in the sense of, where the person comes from, where they navigate, very specific intersectionalities of different oppressions. So, for instance, in one of the respondents is a Czech-born Roma person who has lived in the US most of her life, and she passes as white both in the US and in the Czech Republic. But her children do not pass as white. So she talks about how through her children, who are visibly Roma, she has been able to kind of reassess her own sense of ethnic identity. And the kind of spatial element is extremely important because without the comparison, in terms of how other non-Roma people respond to her visibly Romani children in the US and in the Czech Republic, without this, she would not have been able to verbalize and, rationalize the difference. So one of the things, I talk about in relation to queer intersectionalities is that they're material, they're relational, and they're contextual. And both, or the three aspects, are extremely important because, material is the kind of material reality that surrounds us. Relational is through the people that surround us, whether it's our family, the wider kinship structure, the kind of society that we live in, the community that we consider ourselves to be part of. So these three components are extremely crucial to, considering the lived experiences of queer Roma through the lens of queer intersectionalities. But I also, what I say in the book and in my research is that I feel that, as an analytical tool, queer intersectionalities actually speak to many more groups and their experiences than just queer Roma. And they speak to an intersection of systems of oppression that other groups will be experiencing due to their either ethnic or racial minorities status, their other difference, whether it's sexuality, gender identity. So there are some commonalities and resemblances and parallels that will speak to other intersectionally located individuals.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Are there any more questions that anyone is burning to ask? We have 1 minute left. Type quickly. But I've found this, as I said, I found the book fascinating. The sort of what I really liked was the very long quotes from people talking about their lived experiences and the richness of that qualitative data. It really brought those stories to life. And some of them are heartbreaking. Some of them are, and you mentioned that the woman who, when she travels with her children to Prague and those experiences, but then others are so, as you point out, they're quite ordinary lives in some ways, and they're just trying to live, but there is that challenge, that non-normative challenge is there. And I think that's a fantastic contribution to Romani studies, thinking more widely, to be presented with it. There are, so, as you say, the stereotypes are there, the racist stereotypes exist, but even amongst academics who are trying to do good things, you still end up essentializing what you are trying to study, for better or worse. And so this contribution, I think, is a really good new insight. I remember maybe 10 years ago there were campaigns, photograph campaigns a bit like this, showing middle class Roma, that not all, I think it was called Roma Rising. Not all Roma need to be poor, and you can be Roma and a doctor, Roma sitting in an office, and these images. And again, I think the visual representations are the most powerful challenge to lazy assumptions about that all Roma look like, I don't know, flamenco dancers, or something really simplistic like this. So yes, so thank you very much, Lucie. I really appreciate you taking the time today, and thank you for writing the book, and thank you to all your collaborators and the people who shared their stories to produce this knowledge with you. And I do hope it continues to shape debates and policies as they go forward in institutions across Europe and across the world. But yes, thank you also to all of our attendees. I presume what's happened is that you're thinking very deeply. As Lucie said, she's available on Twitter to ask her your questions another day.
Email, whichever other way, if you feel like it.
Yeah, but yes, thank you very much, Lucie, again, and I think we can draw this.
I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.